Hello and welcome to Mad Props. I am your host, Chris Schnabel, and today we have DeMatteis joining us. He is the creator of one of my favorite runs all time of Spider-Man, Kraven the Hunter, Kraven's Last Hunt. We talk a little bit about that. We talk about a bunch of things. Very casual, very conversational. He was an awesome, amazing guest. You're not going to want to miss this one because he is the man. Before we get started, make sure that you follow us on social media at Mad Props Pod. Make sure you subscribe to the YouTube channel if you're watching right now. It's right below. Go ahead and hit subscribe. Come on, please do it. And make sure you follow us on other social media platforms, including Spotify, Apple Podcasts, iHeartRadio, and everything else. Just go to the follow button. Give us 5 stars. Leave us a comment. We really want to hear from you, and we really appreciate everything you have done. So I am actually sitting down recording, and I just finished the first Mad Props panel at Comicpalooza. If you follow us on social, you've seen it a lot. If you follow Sketching Up, you've seen it a lot. If you follow anything about this podcast, you've seen it a ton because I've been promoting it. I was hoping to get people there, and I just finished. Got back to my my studio and decided to start recording, and it went really, really well. First of all, if you were not able to make it, I will be uploading the entire thing on this channel, Mad Props channel, so you can go check that out. It will be there for you guys to watch and to see and everything else. Pleasantly surprised, there were people there. I was expecting to be talking to a lot of blue chairs, but there were people there, and I appreciate everybody that came out to listen. As I started to talk, people started to sit down like they would hear me. You know, my voice projects, and they would hear me in the backgrounds, and they would come and sit and join in. And everybody that was there, I appreciate you being there. Everybody that was there in spirit, I appreciate you being there in spirit. This was a big, monumental moment for not only this podcast, but for me. I've always wanted to get this podcast out there. I've always wanted to continue to grow and build and all that other stuff. And to do something like this, like Comicpalooza is no joke. I didn't think it was a joke going in, but coming out, I definitely know it is absolutely no joke. Giant convention center. It takes up every single hall. Has the second and third floor as well. I mean, this thing was massive. And they were super nice. You know, they accepted us as a podcast, and they were super nice to set me up with some guests. We'll have some podcasts coming out of that Comicpalooza that we sat down with. We sat down with one person at their booth. We sat down with a bunch of people in a back room. So we got 4 episodes out of that. We also have a mic'd up that's going to come out of it, where I got mic'd up. I walked around Comicpalooza. We go and look at all these different things. We got a lot of stuff coming out of it, but it was a monumental moment because we were accepted as a podcast, and I did a panel for this podcast. Like, I sat on a stage, microphone in front of me, and talked about how we get our guests, how we set up for interviews, how this podcast started, where my background comes from. And to be able to not only be accepted into a giant convention like this, but to actually have a panel where we sit down and talk to people. There were people asking questions that I've never met before. I don't know who they are. They just were there to learn more about Mad Props, there to learn more about interviews, there to learn more about the people that came on the podcast. It was something that just, I don't even know how to start to express the feelings I had for that. Thank you, everybody that came out. Thank you, everybody that supports this podcast. Whether you leave a comment, whether you like, whether you just listen and you don't do anything else. Follow us on social media. Don't follow us on social media. If you've just heard of it, if you're just a friend of mine, I appreciate every single person that tunes in and pays attention more than you can ever know. I hope to see more people, fans of this podcast, out and about at different conventions or out in the wild. Seeing people that were there that have listened to this podcast that I do not personally know, and there was a couple of them, it meant something. There wasn't a lot of them, count on one hand, but the fact that there were people there at this comic convention that have heard this podcast, that I do not know them, it means the world. It really does. Thank you, everybody. Hopefully I get to see you guys next year at Comicpalooza or wherever one we go to next. If you're around, please come out and say hi. Would really love it. Would love to meet everybody. Would love to see everybody. Without further ado, DeMatteis coming up here on Mad Props. You're not going to want to miss it. Stay right there. Roll the credits or title screen or whatever you want. Thank you again. This is Mad Props. JM, thank you so much for being here. I appreciate you joining us and sharing all the history and all the stuff that you're going to talk about coming up. It's going to be great. For starters, one of the biggest reasons I wanted to have you on is because I'm a big fan of your work. I kind of told you before about a story with comic books. I've been a comic book nerd for as long as I can remember. I don't read them as much as I used to now, but my dad used to take me to flea markets. We'd buy like the big bins for like $1 because people were just trying to get rid of all of them. Huge Spider-Man guy. And then when I had the opportunity to reach out and you said you wanted to come on, I was excited like I was that kid with my dad. So I really appreciate you being here because this is an amazing opportunity for not only the pod but myself.
All of us, I think, that are immersed in this world have a kid inside us that's never gone away. And I think that's the best part of it. I always say, especially when I'm writing these classic characters, if there's not some kid inside me who's really excited to be writing Spider-Man or Batman or whatever it may be, then it's time to hang it up, because if there's not like that sense of wonder that you had as a kid, then you shouldn't be doing it.
So how'd you get into it in the first place? Like, where did you, because you went to, you were going to go to school, but didn't go to school because you didn't, for financial reasons, you don't attend. So how do you get into it at the end of the day?
Well, school, I did go to college, but I was supposed to go to the School of Visual Arts, which was an art school.
Visual arts. Yeah.
And, I was a working class kid from Brooklyn. I don't think any of my family had ever gone to college. So I get accepted to this school and my parents hear how much it costs. And I said, we can't send you there. And I was so ignorant, honest to God, I had no idea that there was such a thing as financial aid. So I went, okay, guess I can't go there, So I ended up being an English major elsewhere. Took me three different schools before I got out of college, but we can put that aside. I was not the world's best student. Let's put it that way.
Same here.
Anyway, and so I was always creative from the time I was a kid. I spent most of my childhood drawing or then, playing guitar. I played in bands. I was a music journalist, but I always loved comics. And so I basically started sending, the short version of the story is, I started sending in sample scripts to DC Comics and getting nowhere until I started sending pitches to Paul Levitz, who is a name you may know. He was the president and publisher of DC for a long time. But back then he was just an editor. He had been working at DC since he was 16 years old. I think he maybe was all of 20 or 21 when I started working with him. And he was one of the most seasoned editors up there. Anyway, I pitched him a bunch of stories. They had these anthology comics. They couldn't call them horror comics because there was some rule against it in those days. They called them the mystery books. House of Mystery, House of Secrets, Weird War Tales, all these really strange little anthology comics with like 5 to 8 page stories that have like 3 different stories in an issue. And that's where they broke new writers in. So I eventually sold Paul on a story, and then I sold him on another and another and another. And very long story short, that was the beginning of a career. While I was still doing these other things, eventually transitioned out of the music and the music journalism and focused on my writing, and been doing it for all these years ever since. And that's opened up doors into TV and film and novels and all kinds of other wonderful things.
And one of the things that was interesting you sent to me, you keep saying the music journalist. You were a music journalist for Rolling Stone. So going from music to, how do you get into Rolling Stone? How do you get into that world overall?
So again, since I was a kid, along with drawing and everything else, I used to write all the time. I loved music. I was a musician. And I don't remember how it started, but I just, started sending in things to various music papers and getting them published. And so the great thing in those days was I got free albums. I got to see lots of free shows. And then I got to write about it. Now, didn't make me rich. I might have been paid $5 or $10 a review, but to go and see all these great shows and get all these free albums, it was a great gig, especially for someone who was a musician and loved music anyway. And then at one point, I just sent a bunch of my already published reviews over to Rolling Stone, and they liked them, and they started giving me assignments. And what made me finally stop being a music reviewer was I did a review for Rolling Stone of a Grateful Dead album. So I was only writing there for maybe 6 months or something. And it was a very kind of cynical, snarky review of this particular album. looking back, it's like I shouldn't have gone there. I just shouldn't have gone there. But you're young and cynical and snarky is sort of a default when you're an opinionated young person. And so I write this review, and some time goes by, and Rolling Stone sends me this package stuffed with letters from people who've read this review. When you're an opinionated, to put it bluntly, when you're an opinionated asshole in your private life, it's one thing. When they put it in print in Rolling Stone, it carries a lot of impact. I know how I feel. If I'm reading something, say, about an artist that I really love, and I see something that's like tearing them apart, I take it personally, So I get this envelope stuffed with letters from Grateful Dead fans who are just not appalled so much. Most of them felt like they were wounded, as if I'd written something awful about their mother. How could he say this about Jerry, or whatever it may be? And I read that stuff and I said, you know what? I do not want to be the guy sitting in judgment of other people's work. I want to be the guy creating the work and getting criticized. And believe me, I've been criticized plenty over the years. And I have great respect for, music critics and film critics and literary critics. I love reading that stuff still. I just didn't want to be that guy. That was not what I wanted. And I stopped cold. That was the last time I ever wrote a review.
I can understand that. One of the things this all started because I had a radio show back in college, and when I was working at the radio station, they would send us CDs. Like, sometimes they were big artists, but sometimes they were like these unknown artists. But I also don't really want to criticize. I'm very much that kind of person. Like, I know what goes into creative work. I do video work on my everyday job, and like, we get criticized a lot with some stuff we do, and some stuff gets praised. But I know how much hard work goes into being creative.
That's real. So that's the core of it, what you just said. You go see some movie and you go, God, that was the worst movie I've ever seen. Well, that worst movie you've ever seen, hundreds of people poured their heart and soul into that movie. It didn't work for whatever reason. I've slaved over stories and then put them out in the world, and they just didn't work. You don't know whether it's going to work. You just do your best and you let it go. I think it's very, very, you hear about, oh, this one's a hack, I think it's very, very rare that you're finding hacks out there. I think most people in the creative field are doing it out of sheer passion. And sometimes you hit it and you succeed, and sometimes you fail. So I would rather, put out in the world and also see people talking about the things they love, unless something is like morally reprehensible, which,
unless it's like really just like, why would you go there
right.
on that?
And how often does that really come up? That it's that you've read a book or seen a movie that's morally reprehensible, unless it's some politician trying to score points, by taking something on, which is all bullshit anyway, So I'd rather just focus on the things we love.
Yeah, I completely understand. And the thing people don't understand, you would understand because you've been even more behind the scenes than I have in TV and movies and stuff like that. I've been very, very lowly behind the scenes, but usually that thing you don't like about that piece wasn't even the creator's option. It was something way above them that they're like, we need to do this.
Right.
And you're like, it's going to ruin the story.
Right.
And like, we need this. And then it comes out, people are like, wow, I hated that part.
Right.
And you're just
there are so many pieces at play that we can't see. And yet at the same time, you're the audience. You don't need to know what goes on behind the scenes. You're free to like or dislike. You can't say, oh, I know I didn't like that movie, but I heard that behind the scenes no, the movie didn't work for you. That's fine, But I think, why spend your time beating a drum about how much you hate something? I understand a critic, a really intelligent critic, who looks at a piece of work and analyzes it, not in a snarky way like I was, but in a really intelligent, analytic way, and points out the flaws and talks about the strengths and gives you a more holistic picture of something. But in the age of the internet, there's an old Peter Townsend song, and there's a line that says, anyone can have an opinion, anyone can join in and jump. And this is before the internet. And that's what the internet is. All of a sudden, everybody's a reviewer, everybody's a critic, everybody's got an opinion. And too often, a lot of people get a lot of strength out of putting out negative energy. I don't know why that is. I know my own social media presence, I like to keep things positive. There's so much negativity in the world right now. We don't need any more. We really don't need anymore. There's enough just waking up.
Especially on the internet.
Yeah, and waking up every day in this world right now, can be a burden just to open your eyes and get out of bed. So why do we need more of that?
Yeah, I also like to carry myself with a positive attitude. And I think if you carry yourself with a positive attitude, overall, it does make everything around you much better.
Yes.
Like when you carry around negativity, you could feel the negativity around you. But it's just, and there's no positivity on the internet. It's so strange. It's like, if you're on the internet, you have to be negative. Like you have to say a negative thing. I get you can hide behind your wall of social media. One of my favorite tweets of all time is when that fighter became a broadcaster, and the guy tweeted at him, "Stay in the ring because you suck at broadcasting." And the guy goes, "You wouldn't say that to my face." He goes, "You're right. That's why I said it on Twitter."
He was
'cause
honest.
He beat my ass.
He was honest.
It's one of the best. Yeah, at least he's honest about it. Like, yeah, I'm going to be negative. I'm not going to do it to your face. But I feel the same way. Like, I like bringing on people that are positive as well because, like you said, there's a lot of negativity. We put out posts that have like positive messages or just talk about someone's background or how they got into doing this. And then you'll see comments that are just like, "This is awful." It's like, what's awful about it? What's awful about the person becoming Rocco and Rocco's modern life?
Right,
like, I don't understand.
Right. I was just talking to my wife about this morning, actually. It's like, you can go to YouTube and find, I don't know, a cat video. And like, you go down about 10 comments and there's two guys tearing each other's throat out, How did we get from a little cat video to these guys? But I have to say also for myself, I'd say 90% of my interactions over the years on social media have been positive. I think when you put out positive stuff, that's when you get back. I think when people get a negative comment and then they engage and they kind of blow it up, what's the point? You're just magnifying the original negative energy.
And I think there's a big difference, by the way. You said you were like a snotty reviewer and someone on the internet because you played music, you understand the flows of it. So when you come out with a review that may not be the most positive review, like you're not breaking it down because you're like, "Oh, I don't like that album. It doesn't sound good." You're breaking it down because there's actual pieces of it that you think could have been better. Whereas someone on the internet is just like, "Yeah, this sucks."
Right.
Like,
That's a difference. That's a real difference. And also I have to say, even back in those days, even when I didn't like an album, I tried to say something positive about it. The trouble that I got in with the Grateful Dead review was even what I had to say was positive was about a guy in the group who wasn't like one of the official Grateful Dead members. So people didn't even like the positive comments that I had in it.
Yeah. The Grateful Dead is a funny one because I feel like everywhere I go, there's like merchandise that revolves around the Grateful Dead. One of the big ones is out when I lived in Spokane, Washington. We'd go skiing and snowboarding at a couple different mountains, and they all had the stickers with the Grateful Dead bear or something like that on it. And I've always wondered, like, is this just like they're blatantly taking it? Is the Grateful Dead just really big in ski resorts? But then you see it like wherever you go. I get there's such a big band.
Right. But I also wonder if the imagery has lived on beyond, like some people that have that imagery don't even know it's related to the Grateful Dead.
Don't even know.
But I know
or don't know the
from
music
my own
or
friends
like
that were Grateful Dead. Deadheads are like comic book fans. They're deeply passionate, as those letters that I got testified. And I respect that because. It's great to have a passion. It's great to have something you care about. I think the problem is sometimes people take it so personally, that they really think it's theirs. It's when you get people that's where it sometimes can turn negative, where people think they own that thing, and if something happens within that comic book or that movie or TV show that they don't like, they're like enraged and inflamed and want to go after the creators. And it's like, take a breath. It's just a story. It's just a story. Yeah, and in comics, there'll be another one next month. There'll be a new story next month. Don't worry about it,
It's sometimes just so connected to you, though. Like when you watch a TV show and you feel like the actors are like a part of your friend group.
Right.
So when something happens, you get mad because you're like, "No, that's my friend that happened to." Like you're so engulfed in the story and the characters.
Or for me as a writer, I'm watching something and my writer brain is going, "This is how I think this story should go." And they go in some other direction. I said, "No, you missed it completely." But that's fine. In your private life, turn to your wife, turn to your best friend and complain and bitch and moan. You don't have to go out there in the world and complain and bitch and moan about it, We all have opinions, and it's fine to express our opinions. I love to sit with friends and bat things back and forth about, movies or books or TV or whatever. That's fine. It's, I think, and that's what I learned as a reviewer, when you put it in a public forum. And, sometimes the internet will reach a lot more people than even Rolling Stone did at its height.
Yeah. Yeah, 100%. I want to switch a little bit because you told me that you met John Lennon twice, and I kind of looked up the story a little bit. I want you to explain it a little more. So one was in a studio and one was outside. Could you tell us the story of how you met John Lennon?
Well, they were both in studios, actually. Yeah, and again, this is a story that could fill up the rest of the time, so I will telescope it down. I had a good friend, my friend John Cobert, one of my buddies from growing up in Brooklyn. Wonderful, wonderful musician, keyboard player. We used to write songs together a lot. Just a great, great guy and a fabulous musician. He was in a band that was managed by a guy named Roy Cicala, who was a very well-known engineer and one of the co-owners of the Record Plant, which is a big, big studio in Manhattan. And that's where John Lennon used to record. And so through some circumstances and through the connection to Roy, that his band was used by Lennon on a couple of projects. And we used to go hang out at the Record Plant because what could be cooler to go hang out in this famous recording studio in Manhattan, and see who's hanging around. So this was probably the end of Lennon's so-called lost weekend when he wasn't with Yoko, he was with May Pang. And we were hanging around the Record Plant one night, and Lennon showed up. And so the guys in the band went off to go to Roy's office where Lennon was hanging out to go say hello. And my friend Cliff and I got dragged along with them. Now, I have to back up and say I'm one of the world's biggest Beatles fans. And of all the Beatles, Lennon was always the one for me. He was my rock and roll hero. So I still remember the moment we were in the outer office waiting to go inside. And from in the next room, you hear, well, I think we should go and do this. And then we'll go. And it's that voice, you've been hearing your entire life. And it's not coming out of a TV or a record player. It's coming from the next room, So we went in the room and they were sitting and hanging out and drinking and passing around a bottle. And we hung out for a little bit and we left. And that alone was great. We went back to the band's rehearsal room. Now, this is like mid-'70s, before disco really hit. And we're sitting there, and Lennon shows up in the doorway with a guitar in his hand. He had just been out buying a bunch of records, buying a bunch of disco records, saying, and one of the things I remember him saying is, disco is going to be the next big thing, before disco was the next big thing. And he wanted to play disco with the guys in the band. So I'm sitting there on the floor. Lennon is like 6 feet away from me, 5 feet away from me, playing. So for like whatever it was, 20 minutes or however long they were playing, I'm getting this private show of John Lennon and my friend's band just jamming and having fun. It was fantastic. And I'm thinking, of all the here I am sitting in this little room in this building in Manhattan, out of all the circumstances in the world that could have brought me here, there's John Lennon just standing there a few feet away. It's not a concert hall. I'd seen him in concert. It's just him playing with these guys a few feet away. That was amazing. And that would have been enough for me. But a few months went by, and Lennon had put out his album of rock and roll oldies, which is called Rock and Roll. And they were recording some videos for this British TV talk show. And my friend Johnny invited me to come down to watch the taping. So I basically spent an entire day sitting in the control room, Lennon and the band on the other side of the glass, running through these songs, again, performing. They did 2 songs, Stand By Me and Slippin' and Sliding, over and over and over again until they got the film right. And I got to spend an entire day just hanging out, watching this. And the moment that came along that both totally embarrassed me, and yet to this day I'm so grateful that it happened, was at one point, when I used to write with my friend Johnny, I would write lyrics and he would write music. When I write on my own, I do both. But with Johnny, I just wrote lyrics for him. And so at one point, Johnny introduces me and says, oh, John, have you met, he knew me as Mark, not Jay. Have you met Mark, my lyricist? And Lennon being Lennon goes, oh, hello, Mark, my lyricist. How are you? And so this happened in a half a second, but it felt like it took like half an hour in my mind. I'm thinking, he just said, Mark, my lyricist. I need to say something back to him that has the same rhythm and has the word my in it. And I'm flipping over cards in my head. And I remember that the story where he met Chuck Berry and said Chuck was his hero. And so it comes out of my mouth, and I thought it took a half hour. It was like a split second later. I respond with, hello, John, my hero, which is not the thing probably that John Lennon, the Beatle, wants to hear some guy say to him, Happily, everybody in the group laughed because really what I said was what they were all thinking. He was everybody's hero in the room. He kind of recoiled a little bit from it. I think it was like, they let one of those guys in here. But considering that like 5 years later, he was gone from this earth, I am so grateful that I had a chance to meet this guy whose music meant so much to me and say, hello, John, my hero,
Yeah, no, I understand that completely because I tell this story all the time. I don't really get starstruck except for one time. I'll make it a brief story as well. One time I ran into John Sterling, who was the Yankees broadcaster. It's the only time I ever got starstruck. I was listening to him since I was a big Yankees fan. Listened to him on the radio going to sleep as a kid kind of thing. I was in a cafeteria when I was working a job, and I just bumped into him, and I had nothing to say. I was like, hello. And then he said hello back and walked away. I was like, dude, that was awful. Like,
Right.
I just met some guy that I've listened to my whole life. But like, the fact that, he passed away recently, the fact that I have that story
Yeah.
that I can still tell people,
Yeah.
like the only time I ever got starstruck, and I've met a lot of people, the only time I ever got starstruck in my life was this guy, and everyone's like, oh, I don't know that. So I always have to say the Yankees broadcaster, because most people don't even know who I'm talking about when I say John Sterling. So I definitely understand what you're saying.
Yeah.
Like, when him passing away a little bit after, like, yeah, it's an embarrassing moment. It feels strange, but you have that moment.
Yeah.
Like, that moment
Yeah.
is there for you, and you can carry it for the rest
And
of your
what
life.
I said to him was the truth. He was my rock and roll hero, you know?
Yeah. Yeah, you had better thinking than I did at the time. I couldn't say anything. I said absolutely nothing.
Right. It's just kind of like,
him. That's the guy.
Right. I know that feeling too.
Yeah.
I know that feeling too.
Yeah. Well, it's like one of those things where, and I'm sure you felt like this. You had two interactions with Len, so this is the second time. You had a little more.
Well, let me tell you, the
mull
first
over what you could
time
say.
when he was playing guitar in that little room, he didn't have a pick with him. So my friend Cliff gave him his college ID card, which he used as a pick. And then when
That's
he was
amazing.
done, he didn't know which one of us gave him the card. And he reached out to me with the card to give it back to me. And all I could do was like, you know what I mean? Just point to my friend. I couldn't even get a word out. So at least with the second time, I got some words out, you know?
Yeah, you got to get something out there on that one.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's because these people are like almost mythical in a way, because you've listened to them your whole life, or you've seen them on TV or seen them at events, but you've never actually had this, like, now you're face to face with this person that like almost doesn't exist in your head. Almost like how we talk about TV shows, like you think the characters are your friends.
Right.
This is an actual person, though.
Right.
Like, this person is here, and you know so much about them.
And then for that person, there's who they really are versus what we project onto them as well. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
There's their image and there's their reality. It's an interesting thing. You know, I think
luckily,
go ahead.
I was gonna say, luckily, most of the people that I've been able to meet that I have that image, the reality's been pretty good as well.
That's good.
Like, there have been some people that haven't been, the never meet your heroes thing has not really projected as much for me, thankfully, as some people that I hear. But yeah, exactly what you're saying. It's not always the same that you see on TV.
Yeah. So it was. I feel so grateful that I had those experiences. Really amazing.
So Lennon was almost like superhero-esque to you. Did a lot of those, like him being that kind of figure to you, help with writing some of the stories you did? Like, did any of that stuff kind of go into the stories you'd make?
Into the stories? No, because the only way I can say it carries over, just so much of who I am as a musician and as a songwriter comes from absorbing all those years of Beatles stuff, both the Beatles together and the Beatles individually. I love Lennon's solo stuff. I love McCartney. I love all their solo stuff. And so I try to explain this to people, and it's hard. I feel like I write, when I'm writing fiction, I write as a musician. I think once a musician, always a musician. And stories have melody. Stories have rhythm. Stories have a beat. Stories are their poetry, their lyrics, their rhythm, their melody. They're all these things. And the way you have to, especially in comics, the way you construct a comic book story, the way you place the balloons on the page, the way you hook the reader onto the next page, the art is doing one thing, the words are doing another, the way it leads from one panel to another. It's very musical to me. Yeah, and it's like you're following a song as you're writing this stuff. So that's the way music in general has influenced my writing. And it wasn't conscious. I came to that years later. I realized, I write as a musician, in the writing process and the musical process. It's an interesting thing. The creative mind is the creative mind wherever you're applying it. And I know, when I go through periods where the writing work slows down, like it happened this past month, I had a slow month and I found myself playing the guitar more, and I wrote 3 songs, and it was like, because my brain wasn't channeling in that direction, so it took the channel in that direction. But the creative energy behind it is the same, and you may express it in a comic book or a TV show or a song, or a film or a piece of artwork or a dance, but it's the same energy coming through.
Yeah, I was actually going to ask, do you still do like make or perform music? I know you have an album from the
Yeah,
'90s,
I don't
but do you?
perform anymore. Occasionally I find myself in a situation, very rarely, where I'll perform, but I still do it for my own joy because I can't help it. I have a guitar
Yeah,
and I have a piano, and I'll sit down at the piano, I'll start banging away, and the next thing I know, there's a song coming. And so I've been threatening for like several decades now to go back in the studio and record this giant stack of songs that I have, and I would love to do it. And I hope I get to it before I get too ancient, um, because I got a lot of them, and I would just love to get them down and get them out in the world. Even if it's only 20 other people that listen to it, I'd like, because other thing with any kind of creative process is you do it first and foremost for yourself. I do it for
yeah,
me. It's an expression that I always say, if people weren't paying me, I'd be doing this anyway. So I do it for myself first. It's creatively satisfying. It's very therapeutic. Creativity is like therapy. But then you want to sail that out into the world and share that with people. And I think that's the difference between people that go out there and succeed in the world. I think there are people that are very happy to be creative and just be creative for themselves and paint a picture and put it aside, maybe show it to a friend. And there are those of us that have this, probably as a neurotic urge, to send it out, and you want to share it with everybody. And especially writing,
yeah,
because writing is such a cloistered private, music, you have to go out there and play it. If you want to be in a band, you're out there on stage. A writer doesn't ever have to leave his or her room, really. And even when you sail your work out into the world, you're still safe and secure in your little room. So it's an interesting thing. You want to be on stage in some way and share that work with the world, but you really don't want to leave the little room. So it's a perfect profession for someone like me, who is basically a homebody. That's one of the reasons why I didn't think about it consciously until years later, why I stopped music, because I didn't have the nervous system. If I would have been out there and successful and on the road and doing all that stuff, and I always say it, but I say it only half jokingly, I might have ended up dead in some hotel room somewhere, because I just don't have the nervous system for that lifestyle. I have the nervous system for a lifestyle where I'm here, I'm in my house, I got to raise my kids all under one roof here, be with my family, and then send my little crazy dreams and visions out into the world. It's a nice gig if you can get it.
yeah. No, I understand that. I mean, I do this podcast and we don't have any sponsors or anything like that. There's no money coming in from it, but
Right.
I love doing it, and I love talking to people, and the creativity. It can the first time I realized I had like a creative mind was kind of the same as yours. I played music when I was young as well. I played piano. I was in the jazz band. I was in the school band. I played the drums, and I occasionally find myself still playing. I'm nowhere near as good because I don't play as much as I used to, but I've picked up the ukulele a bunch. I still play the drums when I can. I'm trying to relearn the piano because I haven't played it in a long time. But even like we were at my parents' house, and my dad's he's huge with guitar. He plays his guitar all the time. He's played it for years and years and years. And I was with my girlfriend, and I was telling her like I used to be able to play all these different things. And I was like, I used to be able to play the harmonica. And she's like, you can't play the harmonica. And so I whip out, because it's not that hard to do, the Billy Joel Piano
Yeah,
Man
yeah.
thing, like just really quick. And she was just like, oh, that's crazy. Like you just kind of, I didn't expect that. But that's where it really came from. And then I got into baseball, and I played that in sports in high school. I kind of fell out of the music. But that's when I kind of first realized I was creative. In the jazz band, I would be the one that did the freestyle solo. Even though I wasn't first chair, I would do the freestyle solo because I was able to kind of put these things together and make it sound good without like playing random notes and making it sound terrible. I can go with the flow of the music. I can go with the rest of the band, but I don't actually need a sheet in front of me. I was able to do it. And then I got into, podcasting and video, and it kind of took over from there. But I feel like the same thing. Like music's really what showed me I have that
Right.
creative
And you can
urge in
apply
there.
that anywhere.
Yeah. Yeah. I it, I did apply to, like, I used to do little videos on was like Microsoft Paint or something like that. I didn't realize it until I was going through my old bedroom, and I had like these discs that had like burned on, just like stop motion things, and I'm like, oh, I used to do this forever. Like I don't even remember doing it. And then you find other things that take over that creativity, and you get to do things like this. And I mean, you've done a lot of different things, not only comics, you've done TV shows as well. What is the difference in creativity for one and the other? Like one, you say you're kind of more of a homebody. Do you get to work at home for that? Do you have to go out for
Yeah,
that? And how do you, what is the difference in those?
it would have been a different career for me if I lived in LA, but I don't live in LA. So that, most of the time when I'm writing for these shows, and I'd say 90% of what I've done has been in the animation field. So they're out in LA. I'm here in New York. So most of it we're on the phone most of the time. The difference for me is working in comics. Well, especially if you're doing creator-owned work, that's it. It's total creative freedom. It's you and the artist, and that's it. If I have a vision for a story, I will see that through. The artist will bring their view of it to the table, and it's as pure a creative vision as you're going to get. And I found over the years, even working on these iconic characters, whether it's Spider-Man, Batman, Justice League, Captain America, whatever it is, you can still have a very personal imprint on these characters. You can tell my Spider-Man stories from someone else's because we all have a particular personal filter, a personal vision that we apply to those worlds. And there's a lot of room for that. Now, when I'm working in TV, I get hired, say I've been writing for Batman Cape Crusader, which is the Amazon animated Batman show. The second season is coming on sometime this year. They have a season mapped out. They have storylines that they want to hit. The guys on staff have worked, because I'm working as a freelancer, I'm not on staff. So they come to me and they say, here's the story that we want to tell. Here are the basic beats we want to hit. Develop that for us. So then my job becomes twofold. One is I have to give them exactly what they want. But if all I'm doing is giving them exactly what they want, they could hire a stenographer. So I also have to bring something of myself to the table and take that in and find the passion in it for me to make it something more. So they can see, oh, look, he gave us what they want and he made it something more. Let's hire him again. Because let's face it, part of the reality of being a freelancer is you want them to hire you again because this is how you make your living and that's how you pay your mortgage, you know? So, but I enjoy it because I am working with guys who are, I'm not working with executives who are up there and don't have any story sense. Most of the guys that I've worked with, and most of it has been at Warner Brothers Animation, are guys like, you know, Jim Krieg and Alan Burnett and Stan Berkowitz and all these great guys who are story guys. They're great writers. So, you know, to get on the phone with them and spend an hour and a half talking about story and then going off and writing, it's great to have that interaction because I'm used to being alone in a room with my imaginary friends, you know. So it's nice to have that back and forth with these guys and to step out of what I normally do, and then I put on my collaborative head as opposed to my personal vision brain. I put on my collaborative brain, you know, and it's fun.
Did you freelance from like the beginning of doing comics, and did you ever have like an opportunity to go on board with a company and just decided not to and stay freelancing?
At the beginning of my career in comics, I had this moment where I had a choice, and I hadn't been working in comics very long, but I'd been working with Len Wein over at DC. Len became my mentor and dear friend, and I just broken in at Marvel a little bit. And Len asked me to come on staff and be his assistant editor. Len was an editor on staff at that point. At the same time, Jim Shooter at Marvel was offering me a freelance contract. So I'd still be working at home, but I would have work guaranteed for the period of this contract. And I really, really, really wanted to work with Len. So I was, at one point I said, yeah, I'll come be on staff and be your assistant editor. And that would have led me to a whole different level of, not level, but a different path. But my son had just been born at that time. And so the choice really came down to, do I want to be getting on a subway every day, doing a 9-to-5 job, getting on the subway, coming home, and not see my kid all day? Or I could be home working and be basically a stay-at-home dad, helping to raise my son. And that was the thing that made me choose, and I'm so glad I did, because I don't think I would have enjoyed the staff thing. I really don't think so. You know, I did like I don't know if you even remember, there was a show in the early 90s, a live action Superboy show. And I did it's almost impossible to find now, but it was a fun show. And I did some writing for them, and I did they needed me to come down to Orlando for like 6 weeks to work on staff to help them prepare for their final season. So that was great because it was just 6 weeks and it was over, but I got to have the fun of being on staff and working that way. But really my nervous system is much, much better for sitting in this room right here and just making things up and putting them out in the world my own way.
Yeah, I understand that. I travel a lot for work, and I got the opportunity to not have to travel as much, and I immediately took it. I'm like, yep, give it to everybody else. I don't.
Yeah. Yeah.
I don't want to travel. It gets really
And I
rough.
feel
But
very
it's an
blessed,
interesting decision.
that I've had this lifestyle. I've gotten to do the thing that I love. And the freelance life is not necessarily an easy life. I've had years
Yeah.
where I've made more money than I ever dreamed I could make. And I've had years where I'm like an inch away from them taking my house away. Because you have these great years and you have terrible years. And sometimes the awful year comes right after the great year and sucks away all that money that you had during the great year. And then it comes back again and you don't know why. It's like, it's a mystery. All these years of doing this and it's all still a mystery to me. Why is the work there? Why does the work go away? Where do these stories come from? All these things are mysteries to me. And I love that it's still a mystery. But you have to have the
Yeah.
right, just like I don't have the right nervous system for being out on the road with a rock and roll band, I do have the right nervous system for the freelance life. I don't
Yeah.
have the nervous system for a 9 to 5 job. In the early days when I was playing in the band and trying to make it as a writer, I would sometimes do temp jobs. You see some job, and then back when you had to actually look in the newspaper, in the New York Times for work in publishing, which meant that for 2 days you'd be sitting in a room collating paper for some book publisher. These just menial jobs. But I needed some extra money, so I'd do it for like 2 days. 2 days doing something that I hated was like 200 years for me. It was I just couldn't do it. I always knew that I had to be doing something that I loved. And had I been stuck in some 9 to 5 job that I did not like, or as some people are stuck in jobs that they actively hate, I think it would have broken me.
Yeah.
And so that's why I feel blessed that I've gotten to do things that I've loved, that it's opened all these other doors for me. I don't take it for granted, and I'm very grateful. Even after all these years, I'm still very grateful.
Yeah, I was gonna say it's interesting. So I freelanced for a little bit doing videography, and some of the best and coolest moments of my career were in those moments. Like I told you before, I'm a huge Yankee fan. I've gotten to work with Aaron Judge 2 times in my life as his videographer for his camps, and I got to work with some other Yankees. I've got to work with musicians. A lot of the people that come on my podcast now kind of all started because I had to work, or I didn't have to. I worked a Collecticon and I met a lot of people and they ended up coming on. So like a lot of those moments were really great. But for me, I always wanted to work in a team setting. Big sports fan. I've always wanted to work in a team setting. So like freelancing really wasn't for me. Like I didn't have the passion to go out every day and do something because yeah, working with Aaron Judge, I could do that every single day. But then doing a video for a dentistry office, like
Right.
that really isn't what I wanted
I
to
hear
do.
you. I hear
So
you.
like it was hard to get out and do things like that.
And there's a lot of
So it's interesting to
rejection.
hear the
There's
opposite.
a lot of rejection. You
Yes,
have to have, I
there
always say
is.
to people, really need a hard head and a thick skin because
Yeah.
it doesn't matter how successful you are. And overall, if you look at my career, I've had a very successful career. Rejection is always part of the game. Now, most people don't see the rejection because that's happening behind the scenes. Those are the projects where the doors slam in your face. The audience does not see that. They only see the projects that got made. But there's a lot of rejection, and you have to have a thick skin. And I always say to people, you crawl under your desk, you bang your head against the wall, you shake your fist at God, and then take a deep breath and start creating something new. That's the only way to do
Yeah.
it. And if you don't have a nervous system that can do that, then you shouldn't be doing that. You should be doing something else. You should be going to a job where you have that security. Although, the truth of the matter is, the way the world is right now, it's like we're all freelancers because the way the
Yeah, you
economy
never
is, the
know.
way jobs are right now,
You never
nothing.
know.
No, there used to be, back in like my parents' day, people would say they'd get a job for IBM, and they knew they had that job for the rest of their life. That kind of thing doesn't
Yeah.
exist anymore. The ground is
Yeah.
shifting under everybody's feet constantly now. So being a freelancer has, kind of prepared me for the state of the world.
You do hear that story a lot. Like I've worked at AT&T and because it was the phone company and everybody
Right, right.
it was guaranteed you were
Yeah,
at
yeah.
AT&T. It's also the reason a lot of people like way back in the day didn't really need to go to college because they worked at IBM, AT&T, like these
And then
places
they
where
would
you
move
kind
up
of
the
just got the
ladder.
job and you
Yeah,
stayed.
yeah, exactly.
Yeah, yeah, and you just keep moving up and then eventually you retire and then that was it. But that's not the world today for sure.
No.
I mean, I've worked a bunch, like I said, I've freelanced before. I've worked with a bunch of different organizations and a bunch of different jobs to get to the point where I'm at now. Now, I'm very much am happy with where I'm at now, but like getting there was a long journey, and it wasn't that like when I got out of high school and went into college, you didn't want to be the person that left high school and immediately got a job. You wanted to go to college because you knew you'd have a further, whatever they
Right.
tell you, you go further up
Right.
that way and stuff
Right.
like that. But it's just so opposite of like, even my dad got out of got out of high school, went straight into a job, made a career out of it, and now is retired. And it's just like, doesn't seem like that's the path anymore. It's
Yeah.
interesting change, and it's
Yeah.
still changing today. Like you said, like you're not guaranteed you can get that full-time job. You're not guaranteed to keep it though. Everybody's at
Right,
will.
exactly, exactly. And with AI and everything, it seems like what's going to flip is that the guy who's a plumber, the guy that does something with their hands has more of a chance of holding on to his career than the more quote upscale job that could easily be replaced by AI. You know,
Right. But
you can't replace your plumber with
those
AI, at
jobs,
least not yet.
I was gonna say those jobs. I mean, there's a reason they've been around
Yeah,
forever. There's
exactly,
a reason
exactly.
your great grandfather may have been a plumber because plumbers have been needed forever.
Right. Maybe in
There's
50
certain
years
jobs that are never gonna go
maybe in
away.
50 years a robot will show up at your house with his plumbing kit. I don't know. I hope not. But for now,
I hope not too.
that's very secure. I really respect people that can work with their hands and carpenters and fix things because I am completely inept in that arena. So I really respect it.
I've been trying to learn things like fixing my car, for example. I just learned how to change my oil.
Hmm.
I changed my own brake pads and rotors and just trying to learn stuff like that. That's mostly because it's a ripoff to go bring it to the
Right.
garage.
Right. Right.
My girlfriend brought her car into Subaru and it needed to change her brake pads. Now brake pads are like what, $50, something like that, and they pop in, pop out. I learned how to do them. They're very simple. I didn't realize how simple they are until I did it. They were gonna charge her $600 a brake pad. I'm like, it's not that much labor. It takes you 10 minutes to do it. Like, what are we talking about? So now I'm trying to learn all the different things that I can do. Obviously, there's some stuff you still got to bring it in
Right.
for
Right.
because but it's been nice to learn how to do this kind of stuff and get out and work with your hands and understand the car a little more. And you're learning about this, now you learn about that, and just kind of learning about all that stuff is because I was the same way. I could change a tire, that was about it.
Hmm.
Like
Hmm.
after that, if the shop's not open, my car's not going
Right.
anywhere.
Right.
Like
Right. I hear you.
that's all I had there. So my producer Joe is going to kill me if I do not talk at all about Spider-Man because you have some of the most legendary Spider-Man runs that have ever been put out. So the first question I want to ask about Spider-Man is, can you tell us how you got the first Spider-Man run that you've done? Like, how did you land that role?
I started out at Marvel, and Jim Shooter used to throw me, before he was able to offer me a regular book, he used to throw me odd jobs. So one of the very first things I ever did for him, when I look back, it's pretty funny. I guess they used to have licensed Marvel characters to France, and they would have American writers write a plot, send those plots off to France, where a French artist would draw it, and then a French writer would dialogue the stories. So I actually one of my very first gigs at Marvel was writing Spider-Man plots for French comic books, which is a really weird place to start. That's like my first Batman story at DC was, believe it or not, a Batman coloring book. That was the very first thing I ever wrote for them that had Batman in it. And then I'm trying to think, I guess my first real Spider-Man gig was I wrote Marvel Team Up. When I first started at Marvel, I wrote that for like 3 years, which is teaming up Spider-Man with a different character every month, which is a great way to sort of to take a step into that world and understand it and get immersed in it. And then after that, probably that's what then Kraven's Last Hunt came along some years after that,
Yeah.
and that was a big shift. That was a defining story for me. And then I've done so much more over the years. Then I had 2 years on Spectacular Spider-Man, a couple of years on Amazing Spider-Man, back to Spectacular Spider-Man, and I've done so much Spider-Man ever since. Even this summer, there's a Spider-Man anniversary coming out, I guess in September, Amazing Spider-Man 1000. I have a story in there. There's an anniversary celebrating 60 years of Mary Jane. That I have a story in there. And then there's the What If anniversary, where the story is basically what if Kraven survived Kraven's Last Hunt. So it's an alternate sort of parallel universe version of Kraven's Last Hunt that I wrote. So, Spider-Man never goes away, and I've written Spider-Man in animation. I have a longer relationship with Spider-Man than I do with some of my friends. and, and I often say, and I really mean it, I know Peter Parker in some ways better than I know my best friends, because when I'm writing that character, I know every thought in his head. So I know Peter very well, and every time, sometime they go away, and then we get back together. It's like, oh, Peter, how have you been? It's like being reunited with a friend. Well, let's see what you're up to now, Peter. Where are we going to go? What kind of story are we going to tell about your life? So these characters become very real to you.
Yeah, Kraven's Last Hunt was one of my favorite storylines, like in Spider-Man. Spider-Man is by far my favorite superhero, like I said, coming from childhood. It did help that I started reading the comics probably late 90s when I was a kid, and then the Sam Raimi films come out like immediately after that, and that really just drives it up even more. And
Yes.
then, the animated show and all that other stuff. Before we wrap up, though, I do want to talk about Kraven's Last Hunt a little bit, just because, like I said, it's one of my favorite storylines of all time. When you're going into writing that specific storyline, what do they come to you and tell you to do? How do you get to that storyline? Like, what is the thinking behind that specific arc?
That story had a long gestation. It started out, believe it or not, in my head as a Batman story. The basic beats of it, which I
Definitely could see
which
that.
I pitched to DC, and it had to do with the Joker killing Batman and burying him alive. The same basic beats, but because it's Batman and the Joker, it's going to play out differently. Um,
Mhm.
it got rejected, not because they didn't like the story, but there were other behind the scenes reasons. Okay, so I went away for like a year, and I played with the story some more, took out the Joker, put in a different villain, went back to DC. It got rejected again. Oh, you know what? It didn't start, even before it was a Batman story. I pitched it to Tom DeFalco at Marvel, this idea of the hero coming back from the grave as a Wonder Man story. Had I done that, we wouldn't be talking about it today, because now he's going to remember that great Wonder Man story from 1983 or whatever. So all these rejections are great. You have to learn that as a freelancer too. Rejection is like the universe telling you where to go with your story and how to shape it. So, but I would really love this idea and this image of the hero returning from the grave, And so at a certain point, Marvel offered, I'd been working with Mike Zeck on Captain America a few years before that, and they offered us a run on Spectacular Spider-Man. And I said, well, this would be a great opportunity to dust off that hero back from the grave story. And at this point, Peter had just married Mary Jane, which gave the story more emotional resonance. He was in the black costume, perfect for a story that at that point was probably the darkest Spider-Man story ever. We brought in this character, Vermin, who was a character Mike and I had created when we did Captain America. And I created a whole new villain for that story. It did not start out as Kraven's Last Hunt. And then randomly one day I was flipping through, if you remember, the handbook of the Marvel Universe, where they list all the characters and and I came across this entry on Kraven the Hunter, a character I'd never given a second thought to. I thought he was like a C-list crappy villain. But they mentioned in this story that Kraven was Russian. I'd never heard that before. I don't know if they made it up just for the Marvel Universe handbook. I love Dostoevsky. I love Russian literature, the Russian soul, that whole thing. And all of a sudden, I understood this character in a way I never had before. I threw out this villain I'd created, put in Kraven, and all of a sudden, the story just came together. After years, and I've seen this happen so many times, you're trying to work on a project for years and it's not working, then all of a sudden, all the elements come together. I was also going through a very difficult time in my personal life at the moment. So all that struggle, all that pain that each of those characters was going through, although it wasn't conscious, was coming from my life as well, which gave the emotional resonance of that story something really, really truthful. So all those things come together. Plus you're working with Mike Zeck, who's one of the best visual storytellers in the history of comics, which really, really helps, to say the least. So yeah, and then the other thing that really fed into that is I had just finished my first creator-owned series for Marvel's Epic line called Moonshadow, which allowed me to step outside the Marvel Universe and just write a comic book series, not as if it was a comic book with the rules of whatever a comic book is supposed to be, but as if it was a novel. So I'd really kind of freed myself as a writer. So all the lessons I'd learned creatively working on Moonshadow allowed me to write Kraven's Last Hunt in the way that I wrote it, which was very different than anything I'd written in superhero comics before that. So all these different factors came together. And then the other factor is the people that read the story. That story could have come out and just tanked. It could have been the story I love most. I've had stories that I've really loved, and they just go out there and people just ignore it. Or maybe 10 years later they discover it or whatever. But the audience, the readers, took to that story so that to this day it keeps getting reprinted, people rediscovering it. The royalties, thank God, keep coming in every year. on a story that could just as easily have been out for a few months and gone and never talked about again. That's the part that's also a mystery to me. I have no control over that. Once I sail that story out in the world, it's between the audience and the story. And for whatever reason, that Kraven story really resonated and continues to resonate with people today. And I'm very grateful.
Yeah, I was going to say it's 1987, but I mean, it's even before my time. Like, I wasn't born when it came out, but it's one of my favorite stories. I'm sure you get people younger than I am if you go to conventions.
The people that said, "Oh, I just read this last week for the first time." Yeah, and that's fantastic. Yeah. It's fantastic.
Yeah. They just come up and they're like, "Yeah, it's one of my favorite stories." And you're like 18. This is way before here.
Yeah.
This is almost 10, 20 years before you were
born.
But
that's
why people are still loving that story.
Every year or so, there's a new edition that comes out. They always reprint it. It's always out there, and that's a great thing.
Yeah, and you have some of those royalties for me as well, because you can't see it behind me, but I have my comic book collection, and it's in my comic book collection.
Well, thank you. I appreciate it.
No problem. I'm glad I could be a part of the royalties there. Before I let you go, is there anything that you want to shout out that's coming up for you?
Let's see. I think I mentioned the Marvel things that are coming up. Oh, there's all these anniversaries this summer. There's a Rocket Raccoon anniversary issue that's coming out that my buddy Sean McManus and I have done a story for. I have a novel that came out a few months ago. Oh, look here. It just happens to be right here, called Dark Future, for a wonderful publisher called Neotext. It's sort of a metaphysical time travel story that, with absolutely no objectivity, I can say is one of the best things I've ever written. So if you're a fan of my work, please check out Dark Future. I have the Batman Cape Crusader stuff coming up whenever season 2 hits this year. And I think I hit a lot of things. That's enough. Yeah. A lot of stuff going on.
So check out all the work. Check them out on social media. JM, really appreciate you being here. This was an awesome conversation.
Pleasure. Happy to talk to you.
Been happy to been able to talk to you and be able to talk Spider-Man at the end.
Yeah, thank you
so much.
Thank you, JM DeMatteis, for being here. Thank you all for listening. Thank you, Joe Brown, for producing the podcast as well. Again, please follow us on social media at Mad Props Pod, wherever you get your social media, whether that's Instagram, TikTok, Twitter/X, Facebook, wherever you get it. We are there. Trust me, you will see us, and we will be posting there. If you don't already subscribe to the podcast, subscribe wherever you get your podcast. Hit that follow button. Give it 5 stars. Give it a comment. We'd love to hear from you. Go find us on YouTube. You're going to want to do that. We're going to release some stuff that's not just podcast related. So even if you follow us on Apple Podcasts, which I really appreciate, also go find the YouTube, because we're going to start releasing things. We have a mic'd up video. I went around the entire convention center. We talked to some of the podcast guests. We go see some of the booths. We see some of the artists. We go through a bunch of stuff. So you're not going to want to miss that, but you have to be subscribed to the YouTube to see it. You can also go to social media and see when we're posting it, and then go out to the social media. We have a Discord now. You can go to the description, sign up for the Discord. You'll get updates when YouTube's drop. You'll get updates when podcasts drop, social media drops, and we can have some conversations in there as well. I'm also going to start posting when guests are coming on, so we can get some fan questions in there as well. It's all going to go on in the Discord in the description. Join that Discord. We'd love to see you there and chatting and all that fun stuff. Thank you, everyone, again, for coming out to Comicpalooza. I really appreciate it. For those that don't want to hear about it anymore, this class, you're going to hear about it because it's over now. Thank you, everybody, for being here. Again, thank you, Joe Brown, for producing. I hope to see you guys next week. Thank you guys for being here. This has been Mad Props. Peace out. Deuces.